I just want to say right off the bat that I am super psyched for you because I really love this exercise that you're going to be working on next. I think it's really fun. And in fact, this is the only project from the original After Effects Kickstart that I decided to keep when I remade the class. Now, as with all of the projects, there's an easy version and the hard version. So let's first jump into Illustrator where I can walk you through the action of both projects, and then we'll go into After Effects where I just need to explain a couple of technical things about both. So this easy homework is exactly what I animated in the lesson, only I flipped it and changed the colors around, okay? If you want to take on more of a bite-sized challenge, I definitely recommend that you try this one, okay? So I know I went over this in the lesson and animated it, but just to review the action, okay, in case it wasn't totally clear, this arm here picks up this box here and puts it on the shelf over here somewhere, okay? And then it backs off. And then this arm here picks that box up from there and puts it down here on this angled shelf where it kind of slides down and comes to a rest here. Now, I did give you a second box layer, and this is just a reference, okay? It's called reference, and you could turn this on or turn it off or delete it or whatever. It's just a reference for you. Now, another thing that I mentioned is that this animation is a loop, okay? And what that means is that the poses of the arms have to be the same at the beginning and the end for a seamless transition, right? And I'm actually going to show you later on in this video how to render loops since we haven't really gone over that. One other thing to keep in mind is that these arms can't pass over the shelf here or here like this currently is, right? These are supposed to be sticking off the wall in 3D space further than the arms are sticking off the wall, okay? So this technically is not correct. But the arms can slide back and forth on this slot here for better adjustment. So let's move on now and take a peek at the hard version, which is called the Wow Factory. So here we have a factory where robot arms toil day and night, making keyframes and then sending them out for shipping. As they do, you know. So the way this action works is, it starts here with this first arm, okay? And this arm's job is to pick the correct value to set this slider at, all right? In my mind, this is kind of like sliding this yellow thing up and down, trying to get just the right value. But then when it does, it lets go of this and maybe moves back. Another thing that I need to point out is while this first arm is moving this slider up and down here, the values on this big stopwatch here should be changing to reflect the values of this slider, right? So right now this says 50 because this is set to 50. So it's sort of like 0, 25, 50, 75, and 100, okay? So later on in this video, when we're in After Effects, I'm going to explain two different ways to animate this number here. Then we get to this second arm, and this arm's job is to press the stopwatch to actually set the keyframe, okay? And I should note that the way that I designed this keyframe, the stopwatch rather, is that this button on top can move up and down so it can be animated. Now remember that in order to have nice, clear action on screen, the best way to animate something like this arm is to use three-part action, okay? In this case, the arm would move up in anticipation, then move down to press the button, and then move back up again to kind of settle into place. Anticipation, action, and reaction. I keep mentioning these because it's so important for clear screen action. If that second arm just kind of lunges toward the button with no anticipation, there's a good chance that the audience could miss that action, and it's your job to make them see that. Okay, I'll stop. Now, once that button is pressed, a keyframe, which you can see right here, is going to kind of slide out from behind this and slide along this conveyor belt. And then it's up to this third arm here to grab that keyframe as it's sliding out. Once the arm grabs the keyframe, it has to wait while, okay, this fourth arm reaches up here and grabs this box from off the shelf, and then it puts it down here somewhere, okay? So I should explain also, if you look up here, that I put a reference layer, again, for this, which is a box with a keyframe in it, and this is approximately where I think this arm should put this box, okay? But you don't have to do that. Anyway, you can just throw that layer out if you want. It's just a reference. In any case, once that arm puts that box down there, this arm here, the third arm, which is still holding the keyframe and waiting, can now move over, and it might have to sort of slide over as well, and put that keyframe in the box. And then eventually that arm moves back, okay? And then the final thing is that this arm would then grab that box, which contains obviously the box and the keyframe, and it's gonna kind of move over and put it here on this shelf where it will eventually be shipped out, okay? So let me back up here and let me just explain two other things about this scene, which is, and it's probably pretty obvious, but the arms can definitely slide horizontally along these slots here, and this arm can slide up and down on this slot here. And then finally, there are these kind of sliders and knobs on this machine here. Now this is the machine that makes the keyframes, okay? And in my mind, these knobs and sliders should animate like this. In other words, these sliders are gonna go up and down in a loop, right? And probably each one of these loops is a little bit different, so it seems a little bit random. And then these knobs can kind of turn, probably wanna put the anchor point right down here at the bottom, and then these can kind of like turn randomly like, okay? Now, either way, regardless of which version you animate, I'd like you to bring some personality to the arms if you can. My advice is that small things make a big difference. So for example, when the arm goes to grab something like the keyframe or the box, when it opens its fingers before it dives down, it doesn't have to just be like this. Okay? The fingers, for example, could kind of like indicate that they really want to grab that box by like the way that they move, or for example, like clicking a few times in anticipation or whatever before they dive down. If you think about the arms as different characters, that might help. So is one of them impatient or bored? Another thing to consider is how they move. Are they graceful or are they clunky? Are they really, really heavy or relatively light? You might actually want to act out their movements with your arms as a reference, okay? You might even want to do the robot dance in your chair as a way of figuring it out. Here in After Effects, this is the easy version, and I think this should all be really self-explanatory after the lesson, but here's just a few things to keep in mind. So I'm giving you the art as an Illustrator file, and you're gonna have to import this into After Effects yourself, okay? So when you do that, just go ahead and double-click on the composition, and then press Command and K to open the composition settings. Now I just want you to consider two things when you do this. For one, make sure that the preset is set to this, Social Media Landscape HD, 1920 by 1080 and 30 frames per second, okay? Just in case, make sure it's set to that. And then down here in the duration, right now this, for whatever reason, is set to 1 minute, at least for me. It's gonna be different for you. I think this is too long, so I would set this to something like 20 or 30 seconds, all right? Which just makes more sense to me. It's better to be a little bit longer than shorter. That's how I feel about it, all right? So I'm gonna hit cancel on this. Another thing to keep in mind right at the start is to go ahead and press save and save the project now. And if it was me, I would give it a version 01 designation. The important thing is though that you do save, because once you save it, then the auto save will kick in. And if you happen to crash or something like that, you won't lose that much work. Okay, so before you animate, you definitely want to rig up the arms. Now, if you don't feel comfortable using the method that I showed in the lesson for these fingers, let me review this real quick. I used the property pick whip, okay, to connect the rotation of the right finger to the left finger. And then I got in here into the code and typed minus at the start, all right? I think this is a good way to go, but if you don't feel comfortable doing this, no problem. All you have to do is just not do that, okay? And then just animate both fingers as normal, all right? You just wanna make sure that when the left finger gets into negative rotations, the right finger has the same value, but with positive rotations and vice versa. The last thing I'm gonna mention is probably kind of overkill, but just remember to consider the secondary actions of the arms when they aren't the main focus. Now, I mentioned a few times that this is a loop, but I never actually explained how to make it loop when you render. So let me demo this with the animation that I made in the lesson. So here's my animation, and there are two ways that I can think of right off the top of my head to have this animation loop, okay? Either way though, I want you to do this step first, which is here in your animation, okay? Right now, my animation ends here. This is kind of where the box ends moving, right? So I probably want to go a few frames past that, but then this is where I want it to loop, okay? But my composition is like 5 or 6 seconds longer than this at the moment. So what I want to do is press N, okay, at the loop point, and then this is a really good feature. Check it out. If I right click in the work area, okay, I can go down here to trim comp to work area. And when I do that, it sets the composition length exactly to the length that I wanted that the work area was at, right? So in this case, it's now set at exactly the length that I wanted. So what that means is I could, for example, make another comp like I did here. This is just another 1920 by 1080 comp that's longer than that one. And then I could take my animation here and command and slash put it here into this comp. And then it's pretty simple at this point just to press O, go to the out point here, press page down, go one more frame, and then command D, duplicate this layer, and then left bracket, move it to start right there, okay? Now, this method basically, as many loops basically as you duplicate this comp. So if I want 3 loops, I could duplicate this, go to the out point, press page down, and move it there again, right? And then just say 3 loops was what I wanted, okay? Because really, how many loops do you actually want this to have, right? Like, how many times do you want people to watch it to see your animation? I think, a 42-second long comp or whatever it is that loops 3 times is probably plenty of time for people to understand that this loops, all right? So this is one method, and then you could just render this as normal as like a H.264 or whatever. The other way to go is to take this and turn this into an animated GIF, okay? So the way that I'm gonna demonstrate for you how to do this is slightly different, okay? You could just take this and turn this 1920 by 1080 comp into an animated GIF, but that would be kind of large for a GIF, I would say. Generally with GIFs, you kind of want to make them smaller. So in this case, there's all this negative space anyway, so I was thinking that I would show you how to render this as a square GIF that loops, okay? So I made a square comp, right? Just to review this, I made this social media square like this, right? 1080 by 1080, okay? And what I would do is take my robot arms from the lesson, the animation, command and slash, pull that in here, right? And now, right now, if I pull back, you can see that, this is a 1920 by 1080 composition, so it doesn't quite fit in here. But what we could do is duplicate this, right? And then I'm gonna lock the one on the bottom. And then what I could do actually is scale the top one down. And it works really well in this case, because there's all this negative space like on the top and bottom and sides. So you could pretty much scale this down to be as small or as big as you want to fit into this box better. I would say it's just like, turn this on here to see your title action safety. The keyboard shortcut for that is the quote button, okay? And then once you see the middle there, what you probably want to do is like kind of fudge this into place, both, top and down and right and left to get it very centered, okay? And then once you've done that, let's go ahead and render this as a GIF. The way that I would do that is go up here to Composition and add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue, right? When you do that, eventually it will open Adobe Media Encoder Queue, okay? Now I've already got this as an animated GIF, but basically if yours said like H.264, you would just have to go up here and pull this down until it says animated GIF, all right? And then here, what you wanna do is kind of click in here, all right? Which opens this export settings up. And what I would do, okay, is figure out how big you actually want this to be. Because I don't even think that, I think the 1080 by 1080 is still kind of large for a GIF. Like if you wanted to put this on your website or on social media, well, social media, you might want 1080 by 1080, but just say you want to put this on your website or something, you want it to be smaller and lighter weight. So what you could do is uncheck this here for the size and then set the width down to something like 600, okay? And that, if with this chained, it will make that a square, right? So I think that's great. I'm gonna hit okay, right? And then give this a name and tell this, give this a good place, like a renders folder to put that into, right? And whatever, give it a good name. In this case, I don't care. And then go ahead and render that. Okay, so that took a sec, but when it's done, you could just go up here in Adobe Media Encoder and click on this link, and that will open the folder that you put it in, and then you can go ahead and check this out, right? And that looks pretty good. And if we look at the size of this, it's 45 megs, which is not tiny, but it's not terribly, terribly huge, okay? And it plays down really nicely, and I'm not gonna play this whole thing, but it will loop forever. So that's 2 different ways that you can make the composition loop when you render it. So the first thing that you'll notice when you import the hard version into After Effects is that the arms are now all straight. Okay, when I just showed them to you in Illustrator, I posed the arms just to help tell you the story, okay? But in After Effects, you definitely want these straight because it's much easier to rig them that way. All right. Another thing is that since there are 4 arms now and the names that I've given them are definitely kind of similar, I would definitely suggest that you first go through and color code the different arms with different colors so that you can tell at a glance which one's which. Just keep in mind the things that I already talked about, which is that the arms can't like pass over the shelves or the machines, okay? This 4th arm has a bigger hand so it can pick up this box. And speaking of, this box here is just a reference for where this box and this keyframe want to wind up, okay? So you should definitely go ahead and turn this off when you don't need it anymore. Also, I'm sure it's pretty clear by now, but definitely remember to consider the secondary action of the other arms. This is actually very, very important in this project in particular because there are 4 arms, and for example, this 4th arm here, it has to wait a long time before it does anything, okay? And similarly, once these first 2 arms are finished, they wait a long time before the end of the composition or the end of the shot, okay? So you definitely want to keep all these arms engaged. 2 things about that is that you definitely want the viewer to be able to watch the whole story and consider all of the primary animations first, okay? But you also want the other arms to not be dead and lifeless when they're not working. Now, the main thing that I actually want to discuss technically is this stopwatch here. I'm kind of hoping to see this number here that currently says 50 animate, all right? And I'm gonna go over 2 ways that you can do this. But first of all, you need to actually get this font because right now this is an Illustrator layer and we want this to be live type. So this is going to involve you getting this font, which is an Adobe font called DIN Condensed. All right. So I think the easiest way to get this is to double click on the type tool up here like that. And that's going to create an empty text layer. And then just go ahead and type like 50 in there. And then what you want to do is go up here to the properties panel, all right? And maybe I have to select this or whatever. Go up here to my properties panel. And if yours isn't open, by the way, you can go to window and properties to open that, right? And then here in this text pull down, we've already been over this one time, but what you want to do is press this button here that says add Adobe fonts. Boop. When you do that, it's going to eventually open Adobe fonts, right? Okay. And then you can get up here and search for DIN Condensed like that, right? And then here's the result. That's the one you want. Click on this. And then what you want to do is I've already got this added in, but you want to add this, what's actually this one, DIN Condensed Regular. I mean, both of these are great fonts, the light and the regular. I would add them both in, but certainly for this project, do this one, okay? And then actually you probably need to quit out of After Effects and restart After Effects in order to get that font loaded in. Okay, I already have it loaded in, so I don't need to do that. All right, so I would go here to DIN Condensed, so here it is, and then regular. Great. Okay, now what you want to do is set the color of this. So the fill color, right now this is sort of green or whatever, and I think that the color of this type is the same as like this machine here. So I'm just going to click on that to set the fill color of my type to that color, all right? And then all you want to do is, I'm going to double click on this and sort of set this so that it's smaller, kind of eyeball it in place. I think it's important if you have the paragraph at center text in this case, though I'm not totally sure about that, but that would be my guess, all right? Press my regular selector arrow, and I'm just gonna turn my handles on and then grab this and move this over here. Okay, and get in close, and I'm just gonna make this the right size. I know this is boring, but you'll have to do this too. All right, great. So something like that. Okay, I'm gonna put that there. And now what I'm gonna do is move this down on top of my 50 layer here, and then I'll just turn that off or delete that or whatever. So right now this is in place, okay? So now I have to show you the 2 different ways that I think you can animate this type. Now, if you remember, the way that the action of this works is that this slider here is being moved by this arm, okay? And it's going up and down and it's trying to determine the right value, okay? So I'm gonna kind of like fake a little bit of an animation on here just to show you how this would work, okay? But your animation will be totally different for this. This is just for the sake of demonstration, all right? I'm gonna press P. I'm gonna move this up here so that it's at 0, okay? And for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just gonna set a keyframe there. I'm gonna move like 20 frames and I'm gonna move this down to 100, okay? Now again, this is not the way you're gonna animate this, but this is the way I'm showing you right now, okay? I'm gonna set the work area there. Now, as I said, there's 2 ways that I'm gonna show you how to do this. And the first way is kind of silly and it's a little bit of a hack, but it will still work, okay? The next version I'm gonna show you is harder and more elegant, but it involves expressions, all right? So 2 different ways depending on what you feel like doing, all right? So first of all, if I get in here to my type layer, my live type layer, and I twirl this down, there's a text window here, or text folder, or whatever you want to call this. And in there's a source text stopwatch, okay? And I can actually make a keyframe for this value here at 50, or I could double click in here and type 00, okay? Now, unfortunately, this is a hold keyframe, which means that you can't just like animate this to go like now set this to 100 and have this number just click through from 0 to 100. This just does not work that way, okay? But what I could do is double click in here nonetheless and set this to 100, okay? And that makes a new hold keyframe here at this value, all right? And then what I can do is, and again, this is definitely a hack, but as I walk through this, for example, right now the slider is at the 25% line, right? So for example, this is 0, 25%, 50, 75, and 100, okay? So what I can do now is double click in here and change this value to 25 by typing it in there, right? And I can walk down a little bit more. And when this gets here, I can set this to 50 by double clicking and typing 50. Oops, I typed 520. Okay, and then go a few more frames. When this is here, right? This can now be set to 75. Right? And so let me just play this down for you now, right? Okay, so it's pretty silly and it's definitely a hack, okay? But it will work, all right? And the way you can work with this, if you wanna make this finer now, all right, is just essentially add more numbers in between these keyframes here. So for example, this is now, I don't know, maybe around 10. You could get in here and type 10, all right? And then go in between these keyframes here, and I don't know, right now it's around 35, right? So double click in here, type 35, right? So I could keep making this finer and finer, and eventually it would definitely look kind of like it's animated between 0 and 100. Okay, so that's the first method, and it's definitely a hack, but it definitely will work. You could just keep adding values in here, and eventually this animation will look pretty smooth, all right? So I'm actually gonna delete all these keyframes out, and I'm gonna show you a different method here, okay? And that's gonna involve an expression, like I said, but in some sense, this is gonna be easier to animate than what I just showed you, all right? It involves the expression, so it might not be for everybody, all right? So what I'm gonna do first is select my type layer and go up here to Effect and Expression Controls and pick a slider control, right? That puts that on up here, and if your effect control window isn't open, you could open it here, all right? Anyway, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back to the beginning here, and I'm actually gonna animate this slider, all right? So now right now, we haven't talked about sliders too much, but right now this is totally blank, but it does have values in here. It's got this slider in here, okay? So what I can do is click here on the stopwatch to set a slider value at 0 when this little faux slider is at 0, okay? And then I'll go down to where this is 100, right? And now I'm gonna change this to be 100, all right? So right now, these two things just kind of match each other, right? But this slider, it's not doing anything, okay? So how can I actually hook this up to something like the value of these numbers, right? So if I twirl this down again and show that source text again, okay? Now another thing you'll notice about source text is it has a property pick whip. That's kind of cool. So if I actually pick whip, property pick whip, not parent pick whip or track mat pick whip, but property pick whip up here to the slider, boop. Now right now, okay, this says 20 because that says 20. And if I go back to the beginning by pressing home, this says 0 and that says 0. Okay, and if I press K to go to my last keyframe here, this says 100 and that says 100. Okay, so wow, it all worked great, right? Well, no, not quite, because when I press play on this, it looks pretty much right, but you can see that on this one weird frame, it's adding in, where is that? It's adding, here it is, it's adding in, for whatever reason, a ton of decimal places, okay? And we do not want those decimal places. We just want round numbers here, okay? So this is where I have to write the expression, and this is where, for some people, it might get tricky, but I hope not, all right? So in the source text here, no, actually I lied. In the slider controls here, this is where I have to put on the expression, all right? So if I get down here into my slider control, I can option click on the stopwatch, all right? And now that opens this little text window down here. I'm actually gonna roll this up just so I can show it to you a little bit closer to the center of the screen, all right? So what you wanna do in here, all right, is type an expression. And what the expression is gonna do is it's gonna round this number so that we do not see these decimal points here, okay? And that expression, and you have to type it exactly like this, is math, all right, the thing that you might not like, okay? And that's got a capital M, by the way. So math with a capital M, and then dot, and then round, okay? And round has a lowercase r. So it's math.round, okay? And you see that it's prompting me here to put parentheses in. So if I go ahead and press return, now it'll put those parentheses in, okay? And inside those parentheses, and this is really important, you have to type value like this, okay? It also prompts me for that. Now, when I click out of this, you can see that those decimal points have now gone away, okay? Math.round parentheses value. That's what you need to type in here. And then there will be no decimal points at all. And this source text value will just follow the slider, which you've got kind of faux linked up to this slider right here, okay? And what that means is, for example, you could take all of these keyframes and add ease to this now, right? And now it would look like this, right? It would have ease on it. Or, for example, you could take the second set of keyframes and move this back, and now the animation would be longer, right? But it will always work as long as you continue to animate and tie these two things together. All right, so that's it. The rest is up to you. Now, I hope you have a lot of fun with this project because it's definitely one of my favorites, and I can't wait to see what you do with it. Thank you so much.